as we go. So thank you all for joining. I'm Joseph Montestero, the Global Vice President of Sales, or effectively Chief Revenue Officer of Revigy. And with me today, I have Matt Webb from Mentor Group. Matt.
Yeah, well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're dialing in from. So Matt Webb, I work in our new business team in Mentor, based out of the UK.
Very nice. So Matt and I, or Revigy and Mentor Group, I should say, have a very close-knit partnership where we're driving across all things that are considered in sales technology or sales execution, people, process, and the technology element. So we'll be touching on a lot of those pieces today, looking at IQ, EQ, and XQ, and we'll explain what that is, and really focusing around what sales coaching can do to drive stronger performance, both from your people and from the programs that you've developed in-house or have purchased, which a lot of people have. And that's going to be centered around the sales execution piece. All right, so I think we are ready to get going. I'm just going to preface this with, you can't speak to us, but you can chat us and ask questions. And please feel free to do that. We want this to be very engaging for you to get your questions out there, comments, etc. And we'd like this to be very much an open forum in that regard. And we can get rolling. Matt, take it away, sir.
Great. So good to have you all on today. We've got over 20 people on, and what we know from these webinars is we've got some ideas that we're going to share with you, and hopefully give you a couple of marginal gains that you can take away. What we also know is when you've got so many people on these webinars, you're going to have great ideas and best practices to share as well. So please keep sending those through in the chat. If you've got specific questions, use the Q&A button within Zoom. Please do that all the way through, just so we can share that as a group. So we're going to talk today about sales coaching for stronger performance. And there's going to be a number of areas that we talk about in terms of the way you coach, what you should coach on, the importance of using data and analytics and a cadence. But before we do that, I think it's all worth remembering where we've come from in the last 18 to 20 months globally. If you look at the image that you can see on screen here, remote working hasn't always been the easiest thing that we've had to contend with. Whether you're a sales leader on the call today or whether you're an individual contributor, to be thrust forward into a different way of working, in many cases just overnight, dealing with your customers in a different way, dealing with your teams in a different way, it's not always been particularly easy. And I think as we start to emerge from the pandemic, now we're by no means there yet, but we're starting to emerge. And in many countries, we're going back to work in offices. We're going back to meeting customers in person and our team members in person. We've got to bear in mind some of the legacy that the remote working will have given us, and indeed the hybrid world in which we're going to continue to work on moving forward. Because it's not easy working remotely. Whether you're dealing with your individual contributor within your team, or whether you're trying to deal with partners or customers or whatever, technology is not always working with us in the best ways. But also, working habits have changed quite significantly. So I'm sure we've all been there over the course of the last 20 months where you've got a day full of meetings. You're not sure where you're going to fit lunch in, let alone anything else. Your days are getting longer and your customer demands are still the same. So all these things, when we think about coaching and performance, we've got to think about the impact that has had on ourselves, on our team members, on our customers and partners, and those around us. And that's why we think coaching is so important in what we do to drive performance, taking into consideration where people are, in their personal circumstances as well. Joe, anything to add on that from your side?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you touched on a very critical point there, and it's that this onset of hybrid. Now, a lot of us, when we were individual contributors or even in a sales leadership position, we've been used to that hybrid aspect where we're traveling for work, whether it's for internal meetings to customers, et cetera, but you have that home office setup. This has been significantly increased over the period of time. People were used to working strictly from home. Now they're entering back into the workplace and they're trying to bend all of those pieces together or create this amalgamation of work ethic that, when does it stop? When does it start? How does the commute play in? What does traveling play in? And really one of the biggest elements to drive that forward from a leadership, from an operations or enablement perspective is going to be that coaching or mentoring element. That's going to really lessen the friction for people to get back into or be in that hybrid mentality so that they're still having that same type of productivity or impactfulness, while being in two places, and sometimes, day by day or week by week. And that's something that I've noticed personally as we've been traveling more. We have more customer meetings coming up, more in-person meetings in the offices. I personally am traveling from Boston to Atlanta to do that. So how am I scheduling my meetings around my travel days? How am I working my typical day-to-day around these in-person meetings that can sometimes take up half or a whole day while being in the office? And that's an element that we're also going to touch on here, to really help understand how that's done and make sure that your programs, methodologies, and processes are driving as much success as possible while doing that.
Great, Joe. Thank you. So let's keep on that thread just for a moment, and also acknowledge the fact that, from a performance management perspective, what we might be focusing on with our individuals is also changed. Here you can see some research around some of the different skill sets and challenges that we find in a hybrid or remote selling environment, that we need to be as leaders mindful of when we're coaching our people. And you'll see right at the top of there, gaining the buyer's attention and keeping the buyer engaged. How often are we focusing on that when we coach? Are we really thinking about the skills and capabilities that we need to do from our seller's perspective to do that well, to create a fantastic customer experience? So things have changed. There's no question about that. So when you consider what you're doing within your organization, or if you're an individual contributor, how you're being coached and how you're coaching partners and your colleagues around you, we have to keep in mind what's been changing over the last 18 months and the impact of that and what that will do moving forward. So if you see me looking over here, by the way, everybody, it's because I'm keeping an eye on your chat. So keep the chat coming in if you will. So let's look at sales coaching. Joe's already talked a little bit about this, but we talk about 3 Qs when we talk about performance sales coaching. And we need all 3 in order to do this really well. So the first one that you'll recognize, that we're all quite familiar with, is IQ. So when we're coaching our team, whether that's for performance or for development, we need to know stuff. So our individuals need to know stuff about skills and capabilities. They need to know about their customers, various things that we need to know about. That's all very well. That's IQ. EQ is emotional intelligence. So as we're dealing with people, either as a leader or with our customers, not all of our people or our customers are the same. So we've got to have a good degree of agility in our coaching approach to be able to meet that of the person who's in front of us. I make a fairly direct statement now that when we're coaching, it's never about us. When we're selling, it's always about the customer. So we have to think about the other person in the interactions that we're doing. That agility in the emotional intelligence piece is so vital in effective coaching. The final part that we don't often talk about, and what makes coaching really stick, is the XQ. XQ stands for execution quotient or process intelligence. When you change, whatever you're going to change, whether you learn an instrument, whether you do fitness, whether you learn a new skill capability, it's not a light switch. It doesn't just happen overnight. And coaching is the same. What we need to do with our team members or individually is we need to have a cadence of coaching that changes those behaviors, skills, and mindsets over time. So if you can think about those 3 Qs of coaching, we need to know stuff. We need to be flexible and agile to who we're working with. And then we need to put a cadence or system in place to be able to do that. You do all of those 3 and you get great coaching. If you miss one of those, and probably the success of that is diluted down somewhat.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you, Matt. And I would say one other aspect here is this is cyclical. There is no beginning and end to this. It will not, as the world changes, as we've seen in the last 18 to 24 months, slight variables will be adjusted. You need to adjust those inside of your coaching tactics as well, especially on the execution side. And one thing that really comes to bear on this, the 80% brought this back to me, is when we're looking at the digital selling or digital buying environment now, 80% or 8 out of 10 steps, if you will, of the buying process are typically done ahead of sellers even being introduced. So you need to adjust your coaching to now understand that that's happening and how you're working with just, a sales execution model versus a marketing execution model and how that's all playing together to drive the best customer experience possible and the best selling motion possible for each of your people.
And it works, Joe, right? So if you look at this visual in front of you, quite often in coaching, we'll focus on the top end or the low end of our performance within our teams. Actually, the research shows if you focus in the middle and you can move that by 5%, you can get great gains within coaching. So again, think about who you're focusing on for your coaching. Typically, if you focus in the medium performance, you're going to get a squeeze. You're going to get a pull of the lower levels of performance up anyway. Similarly, the top performers are always going to raise their game to stay top performers. So net, you get benefit across. Let's think about what we coach. And we think there's really two types of coaching that we need to be thinking about. And what I'll ask you to do as I show you these two different types is think, well, actually, where am I spending most of my time? Is it in performance coaching, or is it in development, or have you got a good blend between the two? Because actually, when we think about coaching, and if we bring both of these together in one coaching session, because we're in sales, quite often the performance one takes most of the time. Whereas in the next 12 months, there's a number of reports that show that there's a high likelihood that attrition within organizations is going to go up. Development coaching now becomes very important. Keeping your talent, developing your talent, making them into better roles, or bringing them through into different roles based on their aspirations. So we've got to think about these two different types of coaching approaches as we go through. One question we've just had in the chat is, where is 80% derived from? So 80%, or the majority of the change, comes through when we systemize. So let me give you an example. Let's say we're trying to work with an individual around their questioning capability, and we do a coaching session around it. We give them the knowledge of how to coach, and we give them the flexibility to coach to different types of personas. But that's all we do. The chances are they'll try that, and it won't necessarily work so well, so they revert. Now, if we coach them on a regular cadence over a month or a quarter, which is where the 80% comes from, and things don't work, but we keep going and we keep fine-tuning, keep looking for the marginal gains, that's where we get the change over time that sticks for the long term. So that's what we mean by the 80%. It's not an exact science, but it certainly works through that way. Now, one more piece of stat, and then again, Joe, I'll bring you in, is we've got to be mindful of what's going to happen moving forward. So in essence, still 60% of sellers by the end of this year are still going to be working in a hybrid way. This is the latest research stats from Gartner. And what that says is, actually, we've got to be working on the capabilities, the development and performance from a hybrid perspective. So in our coaching conversations, we've still got to take that into consideration moving forward. The challenge is, in the same research, 7 in 10 individuals say, yeah, absolutely, we've got execs who are looking at coaching from that perspective, and yet only 4 in 10 say we've got a coaching culture. So think about your organization again. That 80-20, that 80% comes from putting coaching into practice, having a regular cadence that then brings it through as a coaching culture. So we know coaching is important, but we don't always do it. So let's ask you a question, if you can go to chat and say, well, actually, what is it that stops us from being able to coach, or stops your leader if you're an individual contributor? What stops us from being able to coach? Because we know it's really important, everybody, and we know that working conditions are changing. But go to your chat box for a second and just say, in your opinion, what stops leaders from being able to coach? And we'll just pause and let you type that into the chat box and see what kind of things you come up with.
Man, it's really funny, that last stat you put up about, leaders considering themselves a coaching organization versus the, really the end user or the receiver of that coaching not considering that to be the case, or less than 50%. That reminds me of a stat when we're looking at organizations and them believing that they're customer centric or customer focused. And when you ask the actual buyers or customers, I think it was 80% believed that they were customer centric, and only 25% of the customers believed that the organizations or the vendors they worked with were customer centric. It's very much that point of focusing, as you said initially, not on yourself as a leader or as a company, but on that end user, on that person that you are trying to drive, level up, drive success for. That's where you really have to be focused. And it would really bring those two numbers much closer together and allow that to exist.
Absolutely right. Yeah, we're getting a couple of chats coming through. One that everybody can see. In fact, they're all coming through now, which is good. Unpracticed and not their core skill set. Yeah, we must remember that, like any skill that we develop, coaching is exactly that. And if you're new to coaching and you try it for the first time, it's not easy. So to get feedback from others on your coaching approach is part of that change process. And again, the cadence is really important. Workload that comes through. Yeah, we often see that. Time, I don't have time to, or it's far quicker for me to tell the individual. And that's true in the moment. If we can get a high degree of autonomy in the individual, then over time, you actually gain far more time than telling them in the moment. Sorry, Joe, you were going to talk there.
No, absolutely. No, agreed. And there's something we're going to touch on a little bit later, leading versus lagging indicators. Someone brought up the inability to prioritize coaching because they do not see the connection with performance it can drive. That's very much the focus on leading indicators versus lagging. It takes time for coaching to actually drive an impact in revenue and success of a team. You cannot focus on those elements, or else that XQ portion, you will not have that cadence. You will not have that continuation because you won't see the result of it. You really do, as a sales leader, need to focus on the bigger picture and look forward 6, 9, 12 months, very much as you would change process. Process cannot be changed every quarter. You are not going to see success. And we've faced this regularly over the last couple of years where people have tweaked their process, tweaked variables, that type of thing.
Absolutely. And the final one on here, coaching needs to be data-driven, but the human element when delivering it. The EQ piece in coaching is so important. It's so important. You know, we're dealing with people. The data piece, the IQ and the XQ combined, and what we don't want to be doing is debating the quality of data. I'm going to come back to that point as we go through this. But data is really important to help us derive insight and then to move to action. So data to insight to action. Data in isolation is actually not useful. But if you do something with it, it's incredibly useful. This is a simple equation that we say that actually sometimes if you're a senior leader on this call today, just take a step back and think, is there anything I'm doing that is creating interference for managers beneath me that means that they don't have time? Performance equals capability minus interference. So if your capability to coach is really high, great. But if you've got loads of other things going on, you won't do it. So we've got to think about those two things and then consider what's really important for driving the performance of the organization overall. Because we know that if you've got a mature coaching culture and a robust sales process, then the stats show roughly 84% of your team will be on target. Without that, it can drop to as low as 46. So the research backs this up as we go through. And here's a few things that we can do. So let's say you've got no process. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Grow in a moment and just do a refresh if that's useful for you. Sometimes we don't have time. We can't manage time. We can manage priorities. So, you know, let's make sure that coaching is not seen as something which needs to take ages. It can be done quickly and in the moment. Let's say we think it's no impact to coaching. Well, then we need to make sure that we are using the data, that we are tracking the data, that we're building the cadence to show that there is a clear measurement, a clear benefit to the organization, to the individual, to the customer as we go through. In the absence of data, that could well be true. We're not engaging. Okay, so focus on the outcomes and development. Remember, it's not about us as coaches, it's about the individual. So let me just give you a whistle-stop tour, and it will be on Grow, because we know that if we do this well, it is going to unlock potential within the individual. Remember, I said that there's a fair chance that the attrition rates are going to grow over the course of the next year. We want to keep good people within our organizations. We want to coach, develop, and support them as we go through. If we don't do that, then the chances are that people could leave, and we don't want that for the majority of the people. So it's about raising awareness and responsibility. I use that word quite deliberately because when I talk through Grow in a moment, you'll see the responsibility of the coaching outcomes are on the individual. Quite often as coaches, we'll put the responsibility onto us, and that's the wrong way around. So here's Grow. So came from a book, Performance Coaching by Sir John Whitmore. It's probably the best known coaching model out there. I'm just going to give you a couple of things that are really important as we go around this. Please put your best practices in the chat box around how you use Grow with your teams over the years. We quite often start with a goal. Now, quite often the goals are too far out. They're too grand. They're too big. And as human beings, we tend to get a little bit impatient if we're not achieving something quickly enough. I used to do traditional karate, martial arts. So when you're a martial artist, you start as a white belt, and over time you get to higher grades, and then we all know that you eventually get to being a black belt. Well, that's a fairly new thing. In ancient times, martial arts never had any grading structure. It's just the longer you had your white belt, the dirtier it got over time, and eventually it got so dirty it looked like a black belt. And that's why we'd like to see progression. If your goal is too far out, then the chances are it's not going to be motivating to hit it. So we talk about the acronym of SMART: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. And it should be, where possible, the coachee who comes up with the goal for their coaching session. Why? Because if they come up with the goal and it's SMART, they're far more likely to want to follow it through. It's not always the case. It can't always be that way if we're looking at, say, performance as an example. So we have a clear goal, really important first stage. The second bit is we need to know where we are today. Now, I would caveat that this is quite often the stage in the process that is breezed over too fast. Let's get straight to the options, shall we? Let's talk about what we're going to do differently. But the problem of doing that is if you go straight to the options, i.e. what could you do, and you go into problem solving mode, you might be talking about things that they've already tried. So the reality is a vital stage where you're talking about, well, what's working today? What can we build on? What have you tried? Where are you getting stuck? And we start to unpick the current situation in a lot more detail. The difficult conversations can sit in here from time to time, particularly if we're looking at performance. In the options stage, as we move forward, we're not given the options as coaches, not initially. What we're saying is, well, what do you think you can do now? What can you do differently? And we ask, what else, what else, what else? And we keep getting the ideas back from the coachee. And you know what? The first 2 to 3 ideas, they're the obvious ones. We keep pushing on beyond them. Then we start to get the real gold in the ideas and the different things. And I always say as a coach, if you can give ideas into the options, just say, would you like a suggestion from me? Simple phrase, but it means that the individual is accepting of your ideas as you go through. And again, they're more likely to do them moving forward. And then in the will or way forward, as it's sometimes called, we prioritize. What 2 to 3 things are we going to take away from this today that are going to move you towards your goal in the most efficient way? Again, I say 2 to 3 things because if we start to go above 3, you get a fairly quick drop off of memory retention of different ideas, which is why we should never have a to-do list, which is too long, by the way. So we keep it simple. We get the individual to summarize that back. We get the individual to send that back to us in an email and plan for the next meeting. Why? Because by doing that, they've got the responsibility for their actions and taking that forward with our support. So it's a simple framework. It's not simple to do. It takes practice. But actually, if we put the coachee at the heart of everything that we do, we can grow performance. And the last thing I'll say on this, and before I get some input from Joe and look at the chat, is remember everything that we've talked about so far about the hybrid way of working now, and think about what might be coming forward. Is there some stuff in the reality, particularly if you've been a field-based seller in the past, in the reality where people are struggling with a different way of working now, that we need to acknowledge before we can look at ways to change moving forward? It's always worth considering the current situation before we do that. Joe.
Yeah, you know what? You just called out the exact point that I was going to make. I almost liken this to, as a sales leader coming into a new organization, this is exactly what you do. You're sitting there, understanding what you're trying to achieve, looking at the reality, observing for the first 30, 60 days, getting the opinions and views of all of those that are around you, and then implementing a strategy. If you were to do that in reverse and implement that strategy first, or, come in with an ego and say, I'm going to change things just because this is how I feel, you're foregoing what is working and what is not working and understanding that prior. And as you adjust variables, you have no real understanding of which variables are impacting that outcome and what you're really trying to drive towards. So this model actually works across the coaching mechanism, coming into a new organization and revamping sales, or adjusting really any portion of an executable strategy inside of an organization, sales process, et cetera. And I really feel this is critical to being successful and understanding what that success is actually coming from.
Let's remember, team, that we can use data in all aspects of this as we start to inform current state, the goal, but also what we're going to do moving forward. A chat says on the goals behaviors part, breaking the goal into smaller time frames and viewing it first as a data point to measure success, and then as behaviors will drive that data point. Absolutely right. And then put the cadence in place to make sure that when we're trying to get to the goal and the data is telling us whatever it's telling us, we don't deviate and do something different. We stay the course corrective needed, but that we keep going. We can get change fatigue sometimes, and that's a bit of a problem. Okay, good. So let's keep going, team, and let's talk about this. And again, go to your chat if you will. And I want just to answer this question. This is very important to the point around data. How do you currently measure sales performance? Again, to repeat, if you wanted to share that to hosts and panelists, then we'll just read out what we're seeing without referencing any names. If you're happy to share to everyone, please do so. How do you currently measure sales performance?
I want to throw a caveat in here: outside of revenue. And I know that's the go-to measurement for all sales leadership. And even when you're working in operations or enablement, that's a big success point, is if we're successful in terms of capturing revenue, hitting quotas, etc. But in my belief, there's significantly more ways to measure if a team is being successful or not, or moving toward a goal of revenue in the later date.
Absolutely. So inspecting the behaviors we know lead to the revenue results. Yeah, we're going to come to more of that in just a moment, but I like that answer. Quite often when we run these, we do get the revenue, we do get performance, we do get how you're doing against your target, what's your margin, and so on. And of course, as we've talked about all the way through, we need to be mindful of what the data is telling us. There is a divide. We do know that if you use data in coaching conversations, we tend to get better performance over time. It's just some stats you can see on here that show 57% of revenue leaders have strong or pervasive use of sales analytics. The challenge that we've got, everybody, is that to use data and sales analytics well, you've got to have good data. So if the behaviors and practices of how you're using your CRM are driving the wrong kind of input, then the data and the analytics is going to follow. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. How do you drive the right usage of your CRM to get the right results coming through? Because without that, you're sometimes debating the quality of your data, and that takes time and it's not efficient to do so. Typically, these are some of the things that we talk about. So, what are your win rates, average order values, targets, sales cycle length? But these are all lagging measures. By lagging, I mean that they are the output, they are the result of what we do. And in the answer that we gave in chat a moment ago, actually, we were talking about leading indicators. So why is it that we look at lagging indicators? The main reason is because that's often, as sales leaders, that's the KPIs that we're measured upon. So we'll go based on what we're measured upon. What gets measured gets done, and so on and so forth. The challenge with that is it's kind of like reviewing the race after it's already been run. It's too late. So if you have a poor performance in the race and go, yeah, I really should have trained harder, it's too late. Yes, you can fix it for the next race, but in this race, it's too late. So that's why we talk about the importance of looking at both lead and lag measures of success. Lead measures of success are activity metrics. So who are you talking to? What are you talking about? How well do you understand the customer? How can you convert that understanding into the opportunities that we can support them on? Does that grow your average opportunity value, and so on? You do all the right kind of activities, and then you get the lagging indicators looking after themselves. Not always, but quite often. Here's some example, and I just put these on. So lead indicators. I put a big caveat on here that says the number of meetings and calls in isolation is a lead indicator, but we should be looking at the quantity and the quality, not just the quantity in isolation, because anybody can fill their diary with meetings. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the quality of those meetings, the number of contacts in the opportunities. We know this is growing. Companies are buying by consensus. So who are we talking to within our buying group? What are their KPIs? What do we know of them? How much have we got in each pipeline stage? Have we got enough? Have we front loaded and back loaded within our pipeline? So have we got a good spread all the way through? What's the opportunity quality like? Has it been well qualified? These are all good lead measures of success. And some of the lagging ones that if we do those lead ones right, we'll follow up. But let's not forget also performance. How are they preparing for meetings? Are they networking? Are they growing their network within the organization? Can they engage people remotely? These are skills based. Are we thinking about their promotions, where they're going to go after this? So again, performance versus development conversations. Hi, Yama. Nice to see you on. So we talk about foundations of high sales performance, and we've talked about the need for data. We've talked about grow. We've talked about emotional intelligence. We just want to share briefly why we think that if you look at different kinds of meetings that you're running within your organization today, are they doing the right things to drive the right performance outcomes? And I'll just talk briefly through each of these four, and then Joe's going to give you some context of the IQ, EQ, XQ in the way technology brings this to life. So the first one, a team funnel review. How clean, healthy, and sufficient is your data within your CRM system? How often do you do a meeting which is just focused on making sure that your close dates are right, your sales stages are right, and so on? The team funnel review meeting is all about that. It's saying, let's make sure that before we start going into the detail around our opportunities or our account plans, let's just make sure that we're using the CRM in the right way to give us the right data and analytics in the first place. Then the next point I'd make is, if you have a meeting where you're combining your pipeline by definition is any business which is going to fall out of the current reporting quarter, and forecast, which is within the current reporting quarter, if you try and combine those meetings together, sadly, there's only ever one winner, and it's forecast, because we need to call the board. By breaking those meetings out, you can have different kinds of conversations using Grow with your team and the right data and analytics, because our CRM is clean and the data is useful. And we can break those out so that we're talking about future business and indeed what we need to do to win the business, give customer value, and close out within the current reporting period. And also, we must remember that within our team, we've got a wealth of expertise. We've got a wealth of knowledge. And do we share that? Do we share the reasons we've won, the reasons that we've lost, the best practices in engaging at C-level, whatever it may be, in a team learning huddle? And do we have a frequency and cadence to do that on a regular basis? So what underpins all of these meetings is a cadence, is a structure, that we do these on a regular frequency so that we drive the right kind of behaviors in the right way. So they're the foundations of high sales performance. The right kind of meetings with the right cadence, using a methodology, thinking about the individual, making sure that the individual is being responsible in what they do. And when we do all those well, then we get changes in performance. But technology plays a key part in everything that we do as a coach moving forward. So Joe, you're going to talk a little bit more about that in the IQ, EQ, XQ perspective.
Yes, absolutely. And so as we continue forward on this, I want to, make one observation here too that I see as happening infrequently or being an issue. Collaboration in those meetings as we're driving that higher level of sales performance is critical. If you're standing there speaking from a stage as the sales leader, as the coach, the mentor, etc., it's not really going to be as impactful. When you get those conversations happening and you're guiding those conversations through the coaching kind of methodology or aspect in that cadence, that's where you really get that success. And technology actually has the ability to help with that. So first, as we're talking with the IQ, developing that intelligence of your customers, or what intelligence you should have and the understanding you should have of your customers. So here we're looking at a little bit of a RevG screenshot that's our strategy map. And this is basically that overarching view into what our customers are trying to do, not just today, not just tomorrow, but overall. This is a way to truly develop an understanding of customer goals and objectives while aligning on your internal goals and objectives as a team. So here you're able to visualize the strategic objectives and priorities. You're able to understand those from a customer perspective, and then develop that cadence or flow of continually validating these elements and really looking forward to driving that deeper understanding, which is going to lead to those lagging indicators of increased sales, better attainment of revenue goals, those types of things. But this is focused on the front end, those lagging indicators of that intelligence and adherence to process, that piece there. So this is really giving you that potential solution approach there. Secondarily, you have your EQ. Now, this is really focused in the terms of customer facing here, but really those messages come back into the internal organization and what you're training your people on. This is really, this is another screenshot of our relationship mapping, but the EQ to me truly means developing an empathy or an understanding for your customers, for the buying committee that you're facing, that you're speaking to, understanding the different ways that they could or will be interacting with your organization and the solution itself, and playing to those higher points when you're having those conversations. So from a coaching element, it's very important, the same way we do as sales leaders, to treat every contact in your clients as an individual that has different motivations and different drivers behind the scenes. That's really critical there. And doing this in a mapped out format with the Revigy solution allows you to look at each person as an individual and as part of that group. Again, focusing on one variable at a time and building out that broader understanding. So this is really, really important and helps you to avoid any blind spots and train people to avoid those blind spots in the future. Matt, do you have anything on the relationship aspect, the EQ piece, that you want to add to this one? I think the IQ is pretty straightforward, but I want to bring you in for this portion of it.
Again, if you think about how your, let's think that one of your goals is going to be to increase your number of your contacts. And again, let's be honest, if you look at the spread of different contacts on here as an AE, for example, you're not always going to build strong relationships with everybody because we can't get on with everybody. So I would say from an EQ perspective, to be able to see this and then work out from a virtual team perspective where other people could perhaps support the account strategy better because they can build better relationships. This is a great way to actually get the virtual team flying in formation.
Perfect. Totally agree with you. And it all really does come down to two aspects here, is collaboration and accountability. As with any coaching mechanism or methodology we'll go through, collaboration, helping people to understand the ins and outs that each individual could be, or each challenge individuals could be facing, as well as having that accountability of tracking forward. Each of these screenshots you're seeing that are coming from the solution do have that element of collaboration where everyone can work on this together and explain themselves and bring that information or detail to light. That's a critical element here, and it's going to only help instill that methodology or process or that training piece that you're working on and drive that refreshment in the future. They'll always come back to this and say, oh, I didn't even realize that, that relationship could exist there, or that we had this blind spot. And it's that continuous improvement that's important. Next one, please. Now, I'm going to focus for a couple of slides here, actually 3, on the XQ portion. As we said, this is 80% of that piece here, and it's really the execution. So the aspect of driving a consistent process, what technology can enable you to do here is twofold. You can develop a guideline and improve or prove your collaboration process based on having strategic goals. And as we said before, breaking them down into small strategic goals that have different objectives and tasks aligned with them, increase the collaboration, the accountability here, and this is going to bring that execution to light. So you're not just focusing on the upfront of identifying the strategy, identifying the people and their motivations. It's truly bringing all of that material with you into an executable flow or process. And that's going to highlight the critical customer needs and how you're going to drive toward those. So now we have that execution flow in place. Now we need to understand where we're executing for that increased wallet share, that increased velocity and sale, whatever those lagging metrics are that you're focused on. This is really critical here. You're looking at a white space map here from Revigy, and what this is highlighting is where your wins and losses have been in the past. And you're recognizing where that potential for new business is, building into that, again, your understanding of the customer strategy, your understanding of the motivations of those folks you're working with, and overlaying that on this map really gives you the ability to say, okay, I understand how I'm going to execute. Now this is what I'm going to execute on because fill in the background data. As we've noticed here, data is critical here for success. This allows you the ability to do that. And on the back end with us, from a technology perspective, you have a lot of automation built in here, whether it's battle cards built into the back end, financial information pulled in, the CRM wins and losses pulled in here. It gives you a starting point, and you're not just staring at a blank screen. And I feel like that's a critical element too. If you're starting from nothing, you don't necessarily know where to go. If you have that historical information about what has and has not worked, that gives you a leg up on how to continue forward with that process intact. And finally, we have, oh, I must have made a mistake here and put a secondary piece in here. So we're going to look at this, and forgive me for this, but this was supposed to be a playbook and really driving what that executable process is and breaking it down to tasks and steps going forward. So essentially, what we'd be looking at here is not only have we identified the goals, but now we know exactly how to execute on them, how to build that process and plan, not just as an overarching play, just because we should, but for that individual company that we're looking at trying to grow wallet share with. So you're knowing exactly what a good process looks like and how to build that forward so that you're bringing together now the executables, the strategies, as well as the people, and pushing forward to drive that revenue growth.
I think this is an important part, Joe, isn't it? Because when we look at sales transformation overall, it's always a combination of technology, process, and people. So we've talked a lot about the people in context of coaching, performance, and development. We've talked a lot about process. Grow is a coaching process, but without the people aspect of it, it's nothing else. But the technology and the data and everything that is going to provide that real view in the reality phase, but also how you can track that moving forward. All these aspects are vitally important, aren't they? You're on mute, Joe.
I thought I took myself off mute. Sorry about that. No, 100% agree. And it's really the focus across all three and the connection points between them that's going to drive that success. Any increased focus on one area versus another really won't do that. Unless you know you're bringing up one of your lagging points to match the other two, that's where you'll have success. It's really, I like to say rising tide lifts all boats. And that's how it works here. If you're, hiring the right people, but you don't have the right process or technology to support them, you're going to lose. If you're hiring the right people, have great technology, but your process is antiquated for the current world we live in, you're not that you're going to lose, but you're not going to be as successful. Same thing for the technology. If you're not enabling your people and the methodology or process you put in place with the right technology, it becomes siloed. You're losing information. That knowledge transfer won't exist as readily, and the collaboration element won't be there.
As we start to get towards the end of our time together today, let me just summarize what we've covered off, and I'd ask you to think about, from your perspective, where your marginal gain would be. We talked about the IQ, EQ, XQ, so you need to know stuff, the IQ, and be agile in your approach with emotional intelligence, and then use a cadenced approach to actually move that forward. More so, within the IQ, you need to know a coaching model and then flex to the individual who's in front of you, because it is about them. Make them responsible for what they're doing. So the IQ, EQ, XQ is one thing. Then we need to consider what we're focusing on. And within that goal, are we focusing too far out? Are we breaking that down into smaller, more achievable goals by focusing on leading indicators rather than lagging indicators, which could be too unachievable? So we talked about SMART within goal setting, and then making sure that we look as much at leading indicators as we do at lagging indicators. And then we talked about the types of meetings that we have and the way technology will play different parts, different roles within that, so that we can drive consistent and repeatable gains in performance across our team. So again, just think about that. What would your marginal gain be? What would your one thing that you could take away and go, well, actually, I think that could be a little gap for our organization that I'm going to look into a little bit further. Take that away, and then it's been a good time well spent for you. Joe, anything else you'd like to add in before we wrap up and open to questions, actually?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece here is really just focusing on accountability and collaboration from both ends. As the sales leader or as the coach or mentor standing in front of everyone, it is important that you put it on yourself to understand their needs and where their potential weak links are or weak points in what they're doing. And then as the person being coached, it's important to empower them to bring their opinion forward and coach based on those elements so they feel ownership over some of that process and methodology you're putting into practice to bring their performance up. If you do those two elements, that's going to really make sure that both parties are engaged, both people are bought in, and they're going to drive forward with success.
Excellent. So I think we've got towards the end. We'll stay on now if anybody's got any questions. Joe, anything to say to wrap up?
No, I just appreciate you all jumping in. And this is something we're going to do on a more regular basis between myself and Matt, our mentor group in Revigy, to really bring some thought leadership to bear, especially as the world is changing around digital selling and digital selling processes. Technology is becoming more important. And I know that you're all facing this a lot of fatigue when it comes to all of the tools that are out there. So we want to make sure we help you understand how to utilize technology, process, and people to enhance what you're trying to do. And also, we'd love to hear in any of the chats if you have any future topics you'd like us to speak about in our next webinar. We'd be happy to incorporate those elements and make sure that we're bringing you guys what you want.
Excellent. In the meantime, everybody stay safe. Thank you for taking the time out again. Yeah, we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar.
Yeah, thank you all very much. So we have a few more minutes here. Any questions, please throw them in the chat. Happy to answer anything. And even if it's about your organization and you don't feel comfortable asking it openly now, please feel free to contact Matt, myself, or both of us, and we'd be happy to talk through that with you on a call or over email. So we just gave them all the information, no questions yet. That's why. Just perfect. That's how I see it. Same thing in a sales call, right? If there's no questions or no comments, everything went off perfectly.
Either clear or confusing.
Exactly. Come on, we got a silver lining. It's always clear, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you all for joining. All right, it looks like we're coming down to the end now with only a few people left. So let's go ahead and call this one. Yeah. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it. And we will talk soon. Thank you, Matt.
You're welcome. See you soon.
See you soon.